Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. This is the last week to sign up to the Herbalism PTSD and Traumatic Stress course, and I am bringing you some more case studies of kind of what does herbalism look like in practice when supporting people who've experienced trauma. So just a kind of content warning, this episode goes into supporting someone who is a kind of asylum seeker from Afghanistan, and there is kind of mention of like border violence and police violence. So I wanted to say as well that I've been trying to collate some resources for people doing kind of herbal solidarity work in response to the hurricane in North Carolina and other places in the US. So I'm going to put the links in the show notes, and I'm going to try and get a kind of more comprehensive newsletter and post out about that. I know people on the ground are like already, just like all over it, but it's more like for folks not in that location who are up for kind of donating. So just want to say again, the course is open for enrollment, not for much longer. And I hope you find this case study interesting. If you don't know what these terms are, I'm really sorry. I go into them all in depth in the course, what these different herbal actions are and different kind of detailed plant profiles about all the plants mentioned. So hopefully you learn something and it's interesting. Let me know what you think. Okay, take care. Thanks. Okay, Ahmed, he, him, recently came from Afghanistan. He was on the move for several months. He said his food was terrible, there was no sleep, and that many bad things happened. He is generally young and athletic and in good health, but he has regular evenings of rage and distress and experiences suicidal thoughts. He doesn't sleep until 4 a.m. and wakes up at midday. He has sores at the corner of his mouth and wounds that have not healed for nearly 2 months. He only has a supermarket voucher to get food and is not able to cook hot meals. He misses home and misses his family greatly. He is Muslim and will not use alcohol tinctures. Okay, so similar to the other case studies, I will work through kind of looking at ruling out any herbs in terms of medication and allergies, sleep, nervous system state, digestion, nutrition, and inflammation. So let's get started. So he's not on any medication, doesn't have any known allergies, which makes life easier definitely in terms of recommendations. Okay, sleep. So he doesn't sleep until 4 a.m. but does sleep until midday generally. So that is around 8 hours. But he has experienced kind of much longer term sleep deprivation, like several months on the move. For people who are listening, who are maybe like less plugged into kind of refugee solidarity stuff, like people maybe traveling for several months, crossing different borders. They might be sleeping in kind of under bridges and, as you would if you were a rough sleeper, or they might be living in kind of encampments, like somewhere like, Calais or Dunkirk, or, they might be having to cross kind of, woodland, especially people coming down from this kind of like Polish route that, they're kind of moving through some of the like densest, oldest forest in Europe. People even have to cross like rivers sometimes and have super wet clothes. People can be in their own clothes for kind of weeks or months at a time. Have lots of health issues like scabies and different things, regular kind of police violence, violent pushbacks, kind of being driven back across the border by border cops, beaten, stripped naked, humiliated, literally there's a project called the Border Violence Monitoring Network, I think it is, or project. And they do kind of reports of violence that people are experiencing, and it's just fucking unimaginable, and as we know, like extremely, like completely racialized. So he was on the move for several months, so he would have been living in these really bad conditions. So this kind of longer term sleep deprivation where you're maybe getting a few hours like in the early hours of the night, or maybe in the morning, because you can't sleep at night because you're cold, or maybe you get to stay somewhere in a tent and that's like the first time you've had a chance to sleep, but you might still be frightened because you owe a smuggler money, or there's just like so many options. But we're looking at kind of very long-term sleep deprivation. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to, kind of mix the sleep and the nervous system state stuff together, because he's clearly often in this kind of fight or flight, like highly activated nervous system state. To experience rage, like that's a real high activation, high energy, like level of distress, right? Suicidality, like I've run a training before about kind of abolitionist approaches to suicide, which I'd really like to record for my website. I did it for a group called Solidarity Detainee Support, who used to be SOAS Detainee Support, who support people in detention centres. But, there is quite a unique suicide mode in terms of neurobiology, where someone is kind of in fight or flight, but is also potentially calm as well. And, it's like its own level of kind of distress where, someone is kind of not able to potentially, be anywhere near sort of safe and social, or think, about options or strategies or reasons to stay alive. It's kind of in this like default state, or not default, but it's in this again high activation state where it feels like suicide is like literally the only answer, like the only response to the current levels of distress that someone is experiencing. So he's clearly really super activated. So what would I be thinking kind of nervous system wise, or, sleep wise, like in terms of his circadian rhythms? They're obviously kind of all over the shop, right? And that's probably because he's had quite a nocturnal life, and being in fight or flight so much really like knocks out our like sleep rhythms. There's probably other things going on, like nutritional deficiencies, for example, which I'll talk about in the nutrition section, but things like vitamin D really like knock your sleep around. Magnesium deficiency really prevents you from sleeping at a kind of like appropriate hour. So I would be thinking about supplements. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But in terms of like actually getting to sleep, we might be thinking about our kind of talking about sleep. It's like newborn life. We might be thinking about, kind of sedatives. So just to run through these, there's like motherwort, for example, which is, it's not like as hypnotic as some other sedatives, but it's definitely has kind of instantaneous relaxant effect on the nervous system, especially for those like really tense feelings of kind of panic and distress. I talk about motherwort in my panic attack blends. Like I've got a free guide to kind of herbal support for panic attacks. So that's an option. The only challenge I found is that I haven't found it very effective as a glycerite. And obviously he can't take alcohol. So I would need to, I'd need to experiment in getting much stronger glycerite rather than, giving him a tincture. Hops is, it's another herb I talk about in the course. It's not always the best for everyone, but it has also got this kind of sedative action, like it's worth putting on the table. Skullcap, I've talked about a lot. I don't know which order people are listening to these in, so I kind of need to refresh with each herb. But skullcap is a plant that I go into depth with in my PTSD course. It's like a fantastic nervous system tonic, real tropho-restorative in terms of repairing the sort of structure and function of the nervous system. I think skullcap would be really beautiful here because it's having that, it's like a dual action, right? So it's having that kind of sedative, like gentle effect, but it's also like nourishing and has like a tonic and it's full of B vitamins and things. So I would definitely be thinking of skullcap, and also you can take it as a tea. And I think the nice thing about skullcap is that it eases you in, like it gives you like a good hour of parasympathetic time before you fall asleep, whereas other sedatives like valerian and wild lettuce, which are also definitely options, they have a bit more of a like punchy right now you're out kind of thing, whereas I think skullcap is more of a like giving you like a little cuddle before bed. Valerian's definitely an option. I'd be very anxious if he was someone that was sensitive to valerian about causing harm with valerian. But if he's someone, like most people are sedated kind of by valerian, and it's like fantastic in terms of anti-anxiety actions. So I think valerian could potentially be great. Wild lettuce, again, it wouldn't maybe be my first point of call because it's so sedative in nature, but it could be good if nothing else is working, really. Like if he's really struggling to get to sleep, like it might do the job. Like I gave a client that I was supporting like a kind of mix with wild lettuce in, and like, yeah, every time they took it, they just slept through like all their alarms and slept till like midday. So yeah, maybe wild lettuce could be good, and he might start getting, 12 hours of sleep a night instead, which would be wonderful, like in this kind of stage of recovery. But yeah, I would, as I've talked about before in the PTSD course, like I would, the way we get to sleep better at night is by reducing the level of nervous system activation through the daytime. So we're going to really be thinking about daytime relaxants to reduce that kind of overall charge and reduce the risk of getting like really acutely distressed in the evenings. So chamomile, fantastic for gut stuff, fantastic for anxiety, really amazing, I think, at like toning down that kind of background anxiety. Lavender, similar. It's just so gentle and nourishing. And I think, we could also think about like an infused lavender oil, for example, if, taking things internally wasn't in this person's comfort zone. For example, lemon balm would be wonderful. Again, it's like, it's not only a gentle relaxant, but it is also kind of uplifting a bit. And I think if you've experienced like so much trauma and what like kind of negativity in the sense of like oppression, not in terms of like, oh, you have a negative attitude, but because like loads of people on the move are like seriously focused and optimistic about getting to the UK or getting to wherever they want to get to, and are hugely ambitious and things. So it's like, I don't want to give the impression that everyone on the move is like super depressed. It's just, I think lemon balm, it's a really joyful herb, like for people who've experienced a lot of fucking horrible trauma, like people coming out of prison. I think lemon balm is just this like luscious kind of like bouncy friend. Hawthorn, if you think he's been in kind of chronic fight or flight, his levels of rage and distress, like there's going to be a lot of kind of cardiac stuff going on. So hawthorn's going to be really nourishing for his heart and his blood vessels. Rose, again, just like put rose in everywhere, but yeah, I think in terms of grief, and like roses are a popular flower in Afghanistan and stuff, so there might be that kind of like emotional relationship with rose. It's also very cooling for inflammation and cooling for someone who's very hot in terms of distress and activation, and also very tending in terms of like grief. It's mentioned in the case study about him missing home a lot and missing his family. So yeah, for that kind of heartache. And then in terms of nerve tonics, I've mentioned skullcap. Vervain could be an option for this long-term chronic kind of burnout, from this like relentless journey. But I think, again, it's not amazing as a glycerite. If you've had success with it, I'd love to hear from you, because I think I need to like up my game with vervain glycerite. Maybe it's because I never get to harvest enough of the herb. But yeah, definitely wouldn't include anything like Schizandra because of like the heat signs, like no to like ashwagandha or anything kind of stimulating. Like that's always my perspective, is that it can really worsen PTSD. The other thing that Ahmed's got going for him is that he's actually in good health. Like he's very athletic, he's young, so he's not had time for this kind of like hardcore inflammation to build up. He's kind of like fit, if that makes sense. So we're kind of looking, it's quite different to someone who's had really hardcore long-term depletion, even though he's like could have understandably grown up with loads of trauma as well. We don't know about his background before making his journey, so I don't want to assume anything, but I think if someone's had like, there's a difference between like 6 months of like horrifying stress versus like 50 years of horrifying stress. Does that make sense? In terms of kind of nerve tonics and like wear and tear of the nervous system. Okay, so yeah, I've mentioned hawthorn and rose. Yeah, licorice could be nice for this kind of like adrenal burnout. Like again, I would only just include a gentle bit of licorice in a blend. He's not on any medication. I don't know the state of his blood pressure. That would be something, if I was supporting him face to face, that I'd really want to check out. Could potentially be having high blood pressure with these kind of rage episodes. Milky oats, again, super safe, nourishing, wonderful tonic for the nervous system. I would definitely include some milky oats. Tulsi would be beautiful. It's a plant that I talk about in the course, that's, kind of used traditionally across various parts of Asia, including in Ayurvedic medicine. And I think, I looked it up, and it's also used in Afghanistan. So it's getting, it could be a little bit warming in terms of, supporting kind of blood flow, like to the brain and things. Like it's quite cognitive-y. But like, I think for Ahmed, it's like, sometimes distress is from a lot of kind of like mental distress. Like sometimes distress is just pure trauma felt everywhere in the body. And sometimes distress is like, it's kind of like an outcome from these like racing thoughts and hyper anxiety and kind of, like unrelenting processing, kind of like my partner has ADHD, and it's just like, you see all these like happy dancing videos on bloody Instagram about, oh, haha, like they're so hyperactive and messy. But it's like, actually, it's so distressing for him to have 500,000 thoughts going, and not be able to get anywhere mentally because of just like the volume of thoughts. So I kind of think Tulsi's very like toning and clarifying for that kind of thinking. And I think for when I felt suicidal, or when I've supported people feeling suicidal, like it often is accompanied by this like racing, like impulse thoughts of like, I have to do this, or this is the only option, or, so Tulsi might be good in that respect. Okay, so digestion, we don't have kind of any info on that. Unfortunately, it's something I would definitely query. Yeah, because I hate to say it, but a lot of like distress can often be from things like gluten, and I've noticed when working in Calais for several years, like people are not used to the like kinds of like hyper industrialized like wheat we have here, and like often develop kind of gluten intolerance here. So and if I have gluten, it literally makes me want to die. So like, it is worth kind of potentially screening. In terms of nutrition, obviously, like there's just vast amounts of like oppression, and it just makes me full of rage, like how people are treated who are seeking asylum. But, in a lot of like the hotels and things where people are staying, like there's not an option to cook, or maybe there's like one tiny kitchen and like several people all cook together or something. But like I know through the pandemic, like people were having meals like dropped outside their door, stuff like this. And it's going to be like very different food, not enough calories or nutrients. He's going to be experiencing like long-term nutritional deficiencies because of kind of traveling and having like bouts of like really intense kind of hunger. Like that's going to be messing around with all his kind of like metabolic signaling, like all the things, like to kind of go without food is like very traumatic. Like my insulin levels are like something I need to keep an eye on because of like chronic stress. Like I think that's a bit of an axis for me in terms of vulnerability. But I often think, is it a relationship to stuff I've been through? Like, like as a kid, my mum would kind of ask us to go to like our friends' houses to eat and stuff because she couldn't afford to feed us always. And like, there was always this kind of like scarcity relationship to food. And then when I was in prison, like I just remember having to like sleep on my front because I was just so hungry like all the time. And like that kind of like imposed starvation on the body like really does trigger a lot of different kind of relationships with blood sugar and fats and stuff. So it's just like an interesting kind of thing to note. Okay, the sores on his mouth, this is his body is telling us something, right? Like I would really be thinking about B12 deficiency. Like if I could give him one supplement, it would be B12. I would want to just nourish him so much with nutritive herbs. I'm thinking about like all the berries, like hawthorn and elderberry, full of antioxidants, rose hips, loads of vitamin C, skullcap I've mentioned with like the B vitamins, milky oats. I would be really thinking about that kind of like optimum nourishment, maybe like a really nice like iron tonic with some of these things like strongly infused. And then in terms of inflammation, like he's obviously got a compromised immune system, right? Like because of this slow wound healing. And, it's really difficult. Like in France, we obviously see lots of people with like chronic infections, and it's kind of like, I don't know if it is actually that their immune systems are that intrinsically like underactive. I think it is just like the unrelenting like brutality of the conditions. Like how can you heal a wound if you don't have access to like clean bedding or a shower or to change your dressings or to like apply like some sort of antibacterial spray or like wound cleaning, you know, like of course wounds are going to get worse and worse and worse without that kind of like TLC and like tending to. But yeah, I would be really thinking about immune tonics, so like these nutritive herbs we've talked about before, you know, like rose hips and things. Like the immune tonic we make for Calais, or that I made for Ukraine's a bit different because it includes tinctures, but I could 100% do like a full glycerite blend for Ahmed. So, you know, things like turmeric and ginger and thyme and echinacea and elderberry, like that would be fantastic. Like what we do in Calais with the mobile herbal clinic is like for anyone that we're doing a wound dressing for, we'll give them an immune tonic as well, just to kind of, you know, strengthen their system. I would be really thinking about sort of antimicrobial herbs here. So chamomile, we've talked about, not only just a fantastic gentle relaxant, but also, you know, really fantastic in terms of gut microbiome stuff. Like lavender essential oil could be quite good. Lemon balm is also very antiviral. Motherwort, for example, is active against like the herpes virus. Ideally, I would get him to a doctor and I'd get him to have like tests, right, to see what's going on in terms of microbiology. Skullcap, like in Calais, we use Baikal skullcap, which is like really fantastic, like broad spectrum antimicrobial. We kind of use the powder and add it to a bit of aloe vera gel and like apply it to wound dressings. So yeah, what I'd be doing with him if I was meeting him face to face is I'd be showing him like, okay, here's how you tend to your wounds, right? I'd give him a whole stack of dressings, like, you know, wipes for his hands, you know, show him how to do it. Like we'd be cleaning them regularly, reapplying the dressing, you know, with the skull cap and the aloe vera gel, or like the wound spray we use in Calais is like a mix of calendula myrrh and water. That would be fantastic. But yeah, in terms of other nerve tonics, like betony, for example, also has like an antiseptic action. Licorice is also antiviral. So again, like with herbalism, it is all about sort of stacking functions. Yeah, sage is also an option, and sage is like this kind of stimulating, uplifting nervine. Obviously, sage is like, you know, I go into all of the safety stuff with all of these plants. In the course, you know, there's like 32 plant profiles with, you know, overview of each plant and contraindications and links to research papers and things. And sage, you know, I'd only want to be giving it for a few weeks. But yeah, also in terms of his kind of mouth ulcers, like linden, for example, lime tree flower, which could be a really wonderful relaxant for him for the evening. So I should have put that in the nervous system section. And like a linden gargle is like fantastic for mouth ulcers. Okay, so that's kind of like a run through of my notes. But yeah, I would, if he's struggling in terms of English, I would want to make sure that my instructions were kind of translated, so he could understand how to take things. I'd make sure everything was like labeled well. And again, I would like keep it simple. I would be like, okay, like take this blend in the daytime, take this blend at nighttime, and take this tea like 1 hour before bed. Like just that, for example, you know, and in those blends, you have your wonderful daytime relaxants, you have your kind of antimicrobials and immune support, you know, because something like elderberry, for example, like it's not only like super nutritive for the immune system, like it's also like a real nervine, like it's wonderful for, you know, kind of musculoskeletal pain and kind of long-term chronic stress. And then, yeah, in the Herbalism PTSD and traumatic stress course, you know, there's like a whole module all about like collective responses to stress. So it's never just like, oh, hey, like we give you these blends and like everything's fine, right? Like it's always like accompanied, you know, by other things. So it might be like, okay, let's find, you know, like a cricket club where he can play and he can like connect with the local community and be physical and kind of make friends. Or, you know, maybe there's English lessons, maybe there's like a local No Borders group that can help with things like, you know, like it's kind of, you know, it's like the whole thing, right? In terms of like collective responses, you know, connecting him, you know, maybe he's already got family in the UK, but maybe he needs to be connected to people from his region here, for example. That's super important. So yeah, all that kind of organizing and solidarity stuff's like really important. And, you know, as we've seen in terms of like the far right and fascist violence, like, you know, we need to make sure people feel like seriously fucking welcome and like we're actually keeping people safe, you know, keeping each other safe. Oh yeah, just on a side note, I mentioned about nutrition, but I would like really go for some kind of, you know, quality multivitamin or mineral, magnesium salts. You know, he probably doesn't have access to a bath, but if he did, like some amazing evening bath with Epsom salts and some essential oils in there, and maybe some dried herbs. Like that would be so nice. Like you could gift that to someone, you know, you could put that in a care package. You know, imagine in the evenings having an Epsom salt bath where you're topping up all your magnesium levels, and then, you know, massaging yourself with lavender oil, having a cup of skullcap tea. Like, can you imagine like how much nicer you would sleep, like following that kind of like, you know, care like of the self and stuff, and how nice it would feel to know like, oh, someone's made up these medicines for you. Like, I think herbal solidarity works in so many different ways, on so many different like intersecting layers of like, it's not just the like materialistic kind of action in the body, it's also the energetics, it's the spiritual relationship, it's feeling supported and taken care of. Like, it's so buffering to trauma. Anyway, but yeah, that's where I would go here. I have done various care packages for people, in hotels and things. But if you are part of like a refugee solidarity group and that's something that interests you, you know, let us know. Like, we'd really love to organize more sort of like medicine making and stuff with the mobile herbal clinic. Yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna like release a whole herbal solidarity survey soon with kind of I just want to kind of redesign how I'm doing everything, really. So anyway, thanks for listening. And just again, please sign up to the course. I'm going to close it next Sunday. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism Podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.